Hi. Before going to video, please subscribe to my channel for more interesting stuff. And the question is, what is the most creepiest or seemingly supernatural thing that ever happened to you?
Ran away from a month-long canoeing camp, walked 20 miles without water and hallucinated Native American chanting and drums beating, wolves howling too. I was 12. A local man from an indigenous tribe came to talk to me when I was found and asked if I heard anything, as it was an area of land that was sacred to his people. Of course, no one actually believes me when I tell this story. My boyfriend's great-grandpa had just died and his 6-year-old mini schnauzer was up for grabs. We wanted to keep him in the family, but no one was willing to take him. So my boyfriend and I took him as our own. One day, after about a week of owning him, we were leaving to go to the dog park. As we are walking out of the bedroom door, I heard my boyfriend whistles to alert the dog to come, and he did. He heard the whistle and followed close behind, thinking it was us. Neither of us whistled. My boyfriend looked at me and said, "Did you whistle?" "I didn't think you could whistle." I said, "I can't whistle, I thought it was you." Turns out, his great-grandpa used to whistle at his dog like that. It was definitely him, no doubt. Really weird experience, honestly. About 15 years ago, me and my friends used to have a homemade gym in a garage outside of residential areas. We were just a bunch of teens drinking, smoking, exercising and playing games every day there. One evening 4 of us finished a card game, left the cards stacked on a big pile, about 3 decks, and went to meet a friend at his house, about 15 minutes of a walk. We locked the doors behind us, big friggin' industrial steel doors with a huge bolt and padlock that would break your foot if you dropped it. We were the only ones with a key. We also blew out the candles we used as light source, as there was no electricity in there. We came back an hour or 2 later and were about to start another card game, but one of the lads noticed the cards pile was gone. One of the fellas screamed as he noticed he's standing right in the middle of ring made out of cards, with king and queen of hearts at his feet. We ran out screaming and our first instinct was to find someone older. We came back with a friend in his 20s, he was extremely drunk, yelled, "Satan, come here, don't scare the kids, face me." Nothing happened. We stayed away from the place for months, but nothing like that happened ever again. I don't believe in ghosts, gods or mean spirits, but this still seriously bothers me. There was literally no access to the place outside of the key I've personally had in my pocket. In 2011 my grandmother had cancer. She didn't want anyone other than her kids to see her when she was dying. She didn't want that to be our last memory of her. My mom flew down to Florida with her siblings to take care of her in her final days. My mom would call me and joke about the things she said while she was high on morphine, my favorite being "Where's a little bird when you need one?" On March 11, 2011 at 11:08, I walked outside to smoke a cigarette. I was playing on my phone for a bit before noticing it was 11:10, and I'd get to make a wish in 1 minute. I look on the table and notice a cardinal sitting inches from me. If you live near where these birds do, you know they aren't a social species. I started at him, and even when flicking my cigarette it didn't fly away, no matter how close I was. I looked at my phone and caught the exact second that the time flipped to 11:11, and as it did the bird flew away. I shrugged it off as weird, and made my wish. I wish for my grandmother to not be in pain. My mom called a few minutes after and said my grandmother was dead. Her time of death was 11:10. It was more comforting than creepy, but it's amazing that it happened. I got a cardinal tattooed on me after, and ever since when someone I love dies, I see cardinals. I have two, neither are that convincing but quite interesting. When I was younger, I was on the landing going towards my parents' bedroom. It was the weekend, so my dad was home. I could see through the gap between the door and the frame where the hinges are and thought I could clearly see my father folding clothes and putting them in his chest of drawers. I jump in to try and scare him and the room is empty. I immediately sprint out of that room. This was a lot more recently. My cat was put down due to liver failure. I was at university at the time and didn't get to see him one last time before he was put down, despite planning to come home only the next day. The phone call breaking the news ended with my mom and I was in bed crying. Suddenly, the box of color catcher strips on top of my wardrobe falls into my desk below. It's been untouched up there for a while. It's not like I'd put it back up there just beforehand. It's probably a coincidence, but it's really nice to think that Treacle might have wanted to say hi one last time. Living at my grandparents' place after they passed away. They had a giant window in the living room that was always shut and locked. One day I saw the curtains lifting up 2-3 feet in a flowy kind of way. I walked over and touched it and it stopped. When I turned around to walk back to my desk I felt a cold, but comforting hand, touch my shoulder. Also had a chair with one of those pump things beneath it. It would ping every time you sat down or got up. Heard it ping one time when I was asleep on the couch late at night. Then saw what looked like a person wearing a hat. Grandpa always wore hats. Walked down the hallway towards the bedrooms. Other friends who stayed over in my grandpa's room would notice their lamp getting turned off or things falling off tables/shelves. My grandpa was always a jokester/prankster though. I have two, both not me. The first was when I was with my mother one night caring for a friend's horses while they were out of town. I was inside and my mom went outside to dump a bucket or something quick out one end of the barn that has a light above the door. When she came back she told me she had seen a little boy standing a few yards away in the grass. When she turned around again he was gone. No idea why he was there or what it was, but it freaked me out too. The other was from an uncle who was a truck driver. He lives out in really rural country and was coming home from a run the one night. He had heard stories in the truckey community about what they called the black dog. It's a large black dog with bloodshot eyes that will appear on the side of the road. Well, the one night he was coming home really late and he happened to glance off to the side of the road and he saw something, and as it passed through his headlights he caught a glimpse of this large black dog. Supposedly it only appears for those who are soon to die. My uncle is alive and well even now. When I was in my early teens, me, my mother, and my younger brother lived in a haunted house. It's kind of complicated to explain the layout. But it was a big old house, in poor condition, that had been split into 3 apartments. We rented the whole house. The upper apartment wasn't habitable. It was stripped to studs and the kitchen and bath were never finished. We used its storage. You could go up there on a summer day with sunshine streaming through the windows, and feel uneasy as someone might feel walking a graveyard at midnight. Being in there just made my hair stand on end. I won't even talk about the basement. It really freaked me out. So anyway, we always felt like the place was creepy, and coincidentally, we had some really hard times for our family while we lived there. So here's where it gets a little deeper. Long after we'd moved, my mother was at a dinner party at a friend's house. There was a couple there that were mutual friends of the host. My mother had met them briefly years before, but didn't really know them well. They had moved away and were back in town for a short visit. While dinner was being prepared, my mother was chatting with the man. Making small talk, she asked where they had lived when they were in town. When the man replied with the neighborhood, my mother said we lived on that area too. When he went further, naming the street, she replied, really? Us too? When he gave the address. Wow. That's something, we lived in that same house. The man looked kind of sad and serious and said we have some bad memories of that place. He explained that, very late one night, there was banging at the front door. His wife, who was very pregnant, rushed downstairs to answer. But as she did, she misstepped and fell down the stairs. When she got to the door, there was nobody there. As a result of the fall, she lost the baby. It was then that my mother remembered. One night, my brother, who was maybe 7 or 8, came into her room crying after having a terrible nightmare. She said that he was terrified. When he finally calmed down, she asked what the nightmare was about. Still sniffling, he said there's something in this house, and it wants children. If that's not enough, the house next door burned down. Years later, on the same block, a woman's body was found buried in a backyard, and there was a gruesome double murder of 2 sisters about 5 doors away. The whole block was cursed. When I was home alone one time when I was like 11, I kept hearing scratching on the windows. I blew it off as a mountain lion or bear since we lived in the county. But I kept hearing it all around the house, so I checked the windows and there were claw marks. I ran my hand across it and it was scratched from the inside. I even went outside to make sure and they were clearly from the inside. My parents ended up replacing all the windows because they blocked the view or whatever, and they blew it off as an animal of some sort, but like I said, they clearly came from inside and these were large claw marks that our dogs and cats couldn't make, and that they were on every window. I don't know, man. So I was driving down a country road. At the time I worked 2 jobs, so it was already dark when I started driving home. The road was really well lit though, and I had my brights on because nobody else was driving around me. Point is, I was alone, and could see the entire road perfectly. Out of nowhere something slammed into my side of the car with enough force to make me swerve into the other lane. It sounded very large, but there was nothing in the road when I looked in my mirrors. The thing sounded person-sized and would have come from side of the concrete median, so how was there literally nothing in the road? I know it sounds bad, but I didn't stop driving. I was really scared and shaken up, so I kept going. I genuinely thought I killed somebody. There was a bowling ball-sized dent on my car's backseat door and a little juicy bloody looking stuff streaking everywhere. Like a big splat. Probably doesn't sound creepy to anybody else, lol. It just freaked me the fuck out because there was no way I hit something that big without either seeing it coming or seeing it behind me afterwards. It literally sounded like I hit a grown-ass man, but it left a dent at the height of a kid. When I was younger, I shared a room with my older brother. We both slept on a bunk bed. I was on the top and he was on the bottom since he was much older at the time. One night around 12 on a weekend, we were both in bed. He was asleep. I was awake reading a book under the covers, and suddenly I had to piss, so I climbed out of my bed, went to my mom in the living room drinking red wine and watching TV, and I let her know I was going to the bathroom. Anyways, I took my piss all good. I went back to the living room, said goodnight to my mom, and went down the hallway to enter my room. Something I need to add is the layout of my room. So basically the bunk bed was against the window, and that window had metal blinds, you know, the ones that are really loud when they move. I enter the room and I see something on top of my older brother looking out the window. It was a tall, lanky, super white, almost translucent skinned creature. Keep in mind there were no lights on in my room. I could only see the silhouette, and its finger was bending the metal blind down looking outside, and I saw the light from the street light outside going through the window onto its finger, and I could see the veins and joints on the index finger. At that point I was screaming and crying and ran to my mom, and she was super confused. Went to the room and nothing was there. My brother didn't even wake from my screams. The one thing I remember the most vividly is as I was screaming I could hear the finger lift off the blinds and make that metallic noise. Anyways, that's my first encounter with that thing, and I have one other as well, but this already took me ages to write. If anyone has questions or knows anything about a creature that kinda fits that description, let me know. BTW, my mother can still vouch this happened. She doesn't like when I talk about it. It was a fucked up night. Edit. I definitely missed some information. I just don't have the drive to write it, so sorry if it's a bit messy. Reusing my story from another thread because I didn't want to rewrite the whole thing. The apartment building where I grew up definitely had something wrong with it. It had been built in the early 1950s by my great-great-uncle, and I lived there from the time I was 7 until I was 25. Over the years I had several major experiences and many minor ones, and there was a general consensus among the long-term residents that bad things were afoot. My first personal encounter with the entity, because I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in demons, was when I was 7. I was sitting on the kitchen floor playing with my Barbies. I just happened to look up, and there, on our indoor porch, stood the lower half of a man. I can still remember exactly what he looked like: lean, with tan pants, shiny brown leather shoes, a tan blazer, and white cuffs with gold buttons, and fair-skinned hands. He seemed like he would be tall, but again, no upper half to be sure. He stood as if he were regarding me silently. Then he opened a see-through copy of my front door and walked out, closing it behind him. The last time I saw him was about 3 months later. I was outside with my mom and grandmother and, again, just happened to look over and see him standing at the corner of the building. His hands were clasped behind his back, and even though he still had no upper half, it looked like he was checking out the area of rot at our foundation. When I told my grandmother about him, she believed it was the ghost of my great-great-uncle. After that, I went years without seeing or hearing anything. Then, in my teens, things got bad. My mom and I would both feel a cat jump onto our bed's pressure, footsteps, everything, but my cat wouldn't be there. We'd go out and find him fast asleep on the couch. Then the footsteps began. Heavy, pounding footsteps in the unfinished area of attic over my room. For context, no one could have been walking there. My mom accidentally stepped on that area and put her foot through the ceiling. There was only insulation and ceiling tiles, no floorboards. Anyway, every night for roughly 2 weeks, this thing would stomp above me for at least an hour. I would get up to make sure the attic was shut, that our neighbors were asleep, that I was not being pranked. As I lay there in bed afterward, I would listen to the steps go in ways that it would take 2 people to successfully emulate from one wall to the opposite wall without crossing over. Starting in one corner and then stopping for a second only to pick up in a completely different corner without any way to have gotten there. As soon as I would wake mom up, it would stop, only to resume after she went back to sleep. Finally, one night, I convinced her to come into my room with me. It started up again and I woke her. I could tell she was scared, but she said, "Maybe it's squirrels?" As if angered, the entity reacted. My bed shared a wall with our living room, which was decidedly unoccupied. It was as if a huge man had balled his hand into a fist and slammed it as hard as he could against our wall without breaking it 3 times. My mirror rattled and we felt the shudder of the blows. Mom was up for the rest of the night with the lights on, and it didn't happen again. The other most overt incident happened around that same time. I had a thick, old-style, TV in my bedroom with a little SpongeBob plushie sitting on top. I was watching something as I was trying to ignore the footsteps and fall asleep. All of a sudden, I saw with horror that my toy was moving closer to me off the edge of the TV set. It fell to the floor and I sprang out of bed. Thinking maybe I'd just put it too close to the edge after all, I turned on my light to check. Nope. There was a thick trail in the dust where this thing had been slid from the center of the TV top to the front. There was even a perfect roll of dust on the floor next to it. Shaking, I stuffed the plush into a box and went back to bed. But not to sleep. There were more things. One incredibly scary thing that I don't want to post because it involves someone I know and they might not like that I posted it. However, I think this gives you a general idea of how creepy this place was. About 3 years ago my city was hit by what was, for us, a major snowfall and ground to a halt. The preschool I worked at closed, unpaid, thanks capitalism, but I was making bank off of babysitting for parents who were still going to work. They were from Chicago. They laughed at us, so I was spending all day for a week and a half in a 100-plus-year-old home, alone with a baby and 2 dogs. Baby cried unless he was being held, so I would usually strap him on me with the carrier, put on a podcast, and putz around. The house always gave me vibes and I absolutely hated putting the baby down in his crib, thus turning my back on his creepy long thin attic closet that never quite stayed closed and made you feel watched, but other than feelings and random creaks, old house, nothing actually happened. Until one morning when I was heading down to the finished basement to refill the dog food container. Baby was strapped on as usual. I wasn't rushing or in socks, the basement didn't freak me out like the upstairs did, TBH, and I felt a hand push me in the small of my back. I fell/skidded down the stairs on my back and landed on my butt, sore and terrified I had almost squished the baby. Baby was fine, but screaming his head off. I booked it upstairs and the baby napped in the living room with me for the rest of the week. I sat for them once or twice more, hated the feeling in that house, also, they had no good snacks, and gave the job to my friend. She has a horrifying story involving baby's eventual little brother and a door shaking from inside an empty room, but that's for another day. TL Doctor, babysitting baby and I got shoved down the stairs by an invisible hand.
Thanks for watching. Please do like, share, comment and subscribe for more videos.